A month or two ago, I connected with Hippy Potter, a dope toy designer and illustrator, and I saw this plush toy that he created called Toasty, and it had a 2D animation in the post, and instantly I was like, oh, I'd love to try to do that as a 3D piece. So I hit him up, he was like, yeah, go for it. So this is the result, and now let's break down the process. So the first thing I did was create the character. So I started with the head, just bringing in some shapes and getting the proportions how I wanted. So here I'm creating the ears. I just started off with a cylinder and shaped that the way I wanted it to be. And I used a Boolean modifier to create the holes for the eyes so that the eyes can sit better in the head. I then masked out where the hair would be and then did a mask extract to create its own geometry for the hair. Once I had my hair in place, I used my inflate brush to add some volume to the hair. And then I took the basic shapes of the face and remeshed them all together into one piece and then started to smooth those out. Once I had the head done, I started to model some of the other elements, first starting with the bread and then the cheese, followed by the egg. I didn't really need the body underneath the cheese and the eggs because I was using an orthographic camera and you wasn't going to see any of that, so there was no need to create that extra geometry. Once I had my basic shape, I then started to use my sculpting brush to kind of fold the cheese and the egg over the bread a little bit. So I went ahead and placed my camera so I could see what it would look like in the final render, and then I started to just continue to sculpt that cheese and egg a little bit more. The next thing I did was created the scene. So I'm just looking at the reference image and just going through and creating each element one by one. So I wanted to keep everything simple. A lot of these are basic shapes, squares and rectangles, things like that. So I'm just going through, placing each of these elements. Some were going to be animated, some weren't. And then adding some very basic colors using the principal shader, just so I can get an idea of what it's going to look like and kind of manipulate the light as I'm building out the scene and how these different elements will interact with each other. After that, I joined all the geometry together and then used an array modifier to duplicate Toasty. So I wanted to kind of see what it would look like when he's coming down the conveyor belt like in the original animation. So I just went ahead and threw that modifier on there to get an idea of what it would look like on the camera. After that was the animation. So the animation was very simple. I wanted it to be a looping animation. So things were either going in and out or up and down. So I'm going through placing the keyframes at different intervals. Some were at 24 frames, 48 frames, 96, etc. And then I'm just looping those using the cycles modifiers. After that, I went over to Substance Painter to do some texturing. I was playing with some different textures, but I ended up just using mostly like a felt texture over it to kind of mimic the plush toy look. And here I'm just drawing on the different veins on the lettuce leaves and then taking that opacity down, changing it to green. And then here I'm doing the same thing on the face, just drawing on those lines for his smile and the lines under his eyes. The final step was putting it all together in After Effects after I rendered it out. So here I'm using an animation that I found on Envato Elements of like some smoke. So that was to mimic the steam coming off the press after he gets toasted. And I just used a mask and animated that mask so that it looks like it's coming out from underneath the press. After that, I was experimenting with some different text and the different colors, just changing it, duplicating it, adding some strokes and some drop shadows of different colors until I got something that looked good on every color when the background changes. And one of the final steps was adding an adjustment layer. And for color correction, I usually just use curves and selective color. I like to keep it simple and just dial in those attributes till I get something I like.